Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss a new episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Sherri Goodman. Sherri, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Fritz.
And allow me to introduce Sherri. She started off getting a degree at Harvard Law School and Harvard Kennedy School, and since then had a very long career in defense and environment, which resulted eventually in being the Deputy Secretary of Defense at the American DoD, where she worked as a Chief Environmental Safety and Occupational Health Officer. She later founded the CNA Military Advisory Board, a group of retired military leaders who are a national voice on national security and climate and energy security. And she currently holds a number of board positions all around global issues and energy. So again, Sherri, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the program. Now,
great to be here.
I know that you were working at the Ministry of Defense, Department of Defense, at the time when the whole thinking about the environment shifted and changed dramatically. I was wondering if you could take us through that change, because I want to talk about your experience with on the environment and security in general.
Sure. Well, thank you. When I first joined the Department of Defense in 1993, it was at the beginning of the presidency of Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and they were determined to elevate attention to environmental issues throughout both the administration, but globally, with greater awareness of a whole range of global environmental challenges. Now, in the military at that time, I would say when I first came in, environmental issues were more often seen as a problem than an opportunity. We had hundreds of military bases that had been declared Superfund sites, meaning they needed the highest level of cleanup possible. We were also closing a lot of military bases at the end of the Cold War, and they needed to be cleaned up before they could be turned over to the civilian communities for commercial and other redevelopment. And we even had endangered species at the time that had stopped training in its tracks at some key military bases, like the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker at Fort Bragg that had stopped Army training until the Army figured out that it actually could still train at this base and protect the bird, the red-cockaded woodpecker that lives in the longleaf pine tree, an ecosystem that actually once covered most of the southeastern United States and now makes its home mostly on military bases because, interestingly enough, military bases are islands of nature, since they are not as heavily developed as many other surrounding areas, which gives the military, in fact, more responsibility for natural resource protection.
Is that a desired responsibility or an imposed responsibility?
Well, the responsibility is established by law through the Endangered Species Act and other statutes, which many of which were coming into force, greater force and application at federal facilities like the military during this period. So, but from seeing this as a constraint and a problem, in fact, over time, we really turned it around to be seen as an opportunity. So the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker, which makes its home in the longleaf pine, then became a realistic training obstacle to actually improve training effectiveness and allow soldiers both to train and to protect the bird. In fact, the Marine Corps then developed its own environmental campaign called We're Saving a Few Good Species, which is a play on the Marine recruiting motto of a few good men. So, many of these things that were seen as problems really became opportunities. Cleaning up military bases allowed for the Department of Defense to become a technological leader in much of this contaminant cleanup, then more rapidly convert military bases to other uses. and to build community partnerships and relations where there had been tension and friction before. So in the 8 years I served in the Department of Defense, I'd say we went from being seen as an environmental laggard to being considered an environmental and clean energy leader.
Okay, now, how did you get involved? Because you trained as a lawyer at Harvard. How did that? How did you move to the DoD? How did all of a sudden environment? Was that just given to you, or did you ask for that?
Well, my career closely parallels the evolution and the end of the Cold War. I really started out as a student of nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy. Mm-hmm. I wrote my first book on the neutron bomb controversy, for which some people called me the bomb lady. I then served as the first female professional staff member on the Senate Armed Services Committee after graduating from Harvard. And on the Armed Services Committee, I had the portfolio of overseeing the United States nuclear weapons complex, which was at the time where we still produced fissile materials for nuclear weapons. And we had reactors and processing plants and a number of related facilities. And in the 1980s, all of these plants were shut down for environment, safety, and health lapses. And so at the time, being on the committee staff, my job was to help organize committee hearings and conduct oversight as to what were the problems. So we went from, I say my career went from weapons to waste. I went from working on producing the material for those weapons to actually overseeing why all these plants had failed, what they needed to be cleaned up, how to improve the safety of the ones that still needed to operate. And so with that background and experience in the U.S. nuclear weapons complex, which is run by the Department of Energy, I then practiced environmental law for several years at a large law firm, and I had also the experience of actually taking major U.S. environmental laws and applying them to companies being held responsible in the private sector or to managing other types of environmental considerations. So I was migrating my career already in the security space from traditional nuclear weapons and strategy into sort of these environmental considerations. And when I joined the Department of Defense, it was in many ways for me the perfect marriage between my interest in security and this emerging field at the time of environmental security.
Yes, when preparing this interview, I saw a couple of quotes on, okay, we need environmental security. And another quote from you is climate change is a threat multiplier. So I was wondering if you could take us along what you mean by that.
Sure. So after I left the Department of Defense, I joined a Navy research organization called the Center for Naval Analysis. And there I formed in 2006 the first group of generals and admirals to address the national security implications of climate change. At the time, we didn't really connect the dots between climate change, which we understood. We were beginning to understand the science of climate, the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we didn't understand what that meant in terms of our nation's security. How would it change? How could it produce instability around the world? How would it change our geostrategic perspective? What did it mean in terms of what kind of conflicts we might face in the future? What type of competition, global migration, stability of coastlines? So we spent a year, the generals, admirals, myself, and our analysts, learning from the world's leading climate scientists in the US, in Europe. And we produced our first report in 2007 called National Security and the Threat of Climate Change. And in that, we characterized, and I coined the phrase, threat multiplier. Threat multiplier to reflect the relationship between climate change acting as a force for instability in fragile regions of the world. That it would add to threats we already have, such as terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, and other risks that we were facing. Climate change would act to amplify, aggravate those threats. And indeed, we've seen that. 15 years ago, we didn't really appreciate the instability that would be caused even at home, even in the United States, for example, from regular hurricanes, flash floods, extreme weather events, whether it's heat or cold, wildfires, that season that now runs almost the entire year. And the fact that now our military forces are responding almost as frequently to domestic natural disasters, many of which are climate fueled, as they are to deploying overseas. That's been a real shift in how the military thinks about its own, how it's deeply affected by climate impacts.
That triggers for me a whole train of thought here. First of all, is the fact that there is climate change accepted in the US? Is it accepted there is climate change, or are there too many deniers? Because I can assume that if you accept climate change, then you can also see, following the reasoning, you should actually do something about that because it's threatening your environment, your safety.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, and I do think it's accepted now. We did go through a period in the U.S. of climate denialism.
Yeah.
It was amplified in the last administration when climate was often considered a four-letter word, but nonetheless, the work continued even in the Department of Defense during that period. And now the Biden administration, has made climate one of its top priorities, and it's adopted a whole range of priorities for national security on climate change that reflect the work that I've done and others have done over the last 15 years, now building a climate trained and ready military. The first time we really tried to do that, threading it throughout all sorts of decisions, whether it's training our troops, developing our equipment, conducting our research and development, exercises and training activities. I mean, there's a whole range. It's threaded all throughout the range of military activities today.
Okay. And can you also transfer that to the private sector?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think you see the private sector and companies becoming much more serious about their climate responsibilities, incorporating ESG principles, including in their supply chains and flowing down, managing and measuring their greenhouse gas emissions. And then you see whole new sectors of the economy that are based on climate tech and the green energy transition. So, are we moving fast enough? You could argue no. We're definitely not moving as fast as the climate threat that we face, because we are on track to raise temperatures probably at least more than 2 degrees, even if we were to come in compliance with the Paris Climate Accords now, and probably closer to 3. And that is going to produce unlivable conditions in certain parts of the world.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is, because sometimes I see the narrative about climate change, oh, let's protect a couple of trees, let's protect a couple of cute animals. But what you're actually saying, let's protect ourselves, because we're going to live in a world which is going to be much more volatile because of climate change. And I think sometimes I don't think that message has come across yet.
No, we should remember that Mother Nature always wins.
Yeah.
Nature will adapt faster than humans, most likely. And the question is whether we can adapt and become resilient to the changing conditions, and whether we have the wherewithal to make the planet livable for humans in the future.
Good point. Now, where do you draw your inspiration from doing what you do at the moment?
Well, I mean, if I go back to my earliest inspirations, really, my parents are both Holocaust refugees.
Okay.
They were born in Germany in the early 1930s, and they were fortunate to escape. My father actually got out through the Netherlands, and my mother through France. But they were among the fortunate few German Jews who were able to escape and come to the United States with their parents. And so I was raised appreciating that so many could perish so quickly at the whim, of fascism, of an authoritarianism, much like we see with Putin in Ukraine today, trying to commit another genocide against innocent people. And so we have to do everything we can to fight against that, against fascism, authoritarianism. And we also have to do everything we can to sort of protect ourselves and preserve the best side of humans with nature, and a sort of broader concept of ecological security.
Now, if your game is ecological security, and this is like a very big global goal, how did you define your own success in this case? What drives you? What makes you? How do you find success here?
Well, as I said, I've been very pleased and privileged that the Department of Defense, since the time I began working there now, a quarter century ago, has gone from being an environmental laggard to an environmental and clean energy leader. That isn't to say there isn't a long way to go still. There's quite a bit more work to do. And it's hard often to measure success in this field, but I sometimes people refer to me as the mother of climate security, a field that, I helped to found now 15 plus years ago. And we have a whole generation of scholars, of leaders, of practitioners, technologists, analysts in this field who see this as their life's calling. And so, with 3 children of my own who each are passionate in their own way about trying to make the world a better place, and now a whole generation of students and next generation leaders that I work with on a regular basis, it really is, the next generation is our legacy, it's our future, and that's where I hope success really comes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing, your success is that you've been able to inspire a next generation to take this serious and to do something about that.
I think so. It's really become, top. It is the calling for so many people today, and it's a calling in a way that really has mainstreamed climate considerations into every walk of life. It's not an either or. You don't have to fight the system. You have to internally change the system. In many ways, that's how I've worked most of my life. I have worked inside and a part of larger, bigger institutions, trying to change them from within to be a better force for good.
That's actually a segue to one of the other questions I had for you. Your advice to young managers when they start their journey, is that is one of those advices try to change from within?
I often think that's how you can have the most lasting endurance. It's hard when you're younger and you feel like, okay, I'm just a cog in a big wheel and I can't see at the top. I'm not leading at the top yet. I don't know how what I do every day is going to make a difference. And it is sometimes hard to see out and to see up. But I do think that if you keep your eye focused on what you want to achieve, and you also develop both the relationships and the skill sets you need to get it done. For example, I had to befriend and create relationships with a lot of generals, senior generals and admirals when I was, a young woman, in a senior position at the Department of Defense at a time when, women weren't always taken the most seriously. And I had to prove myself, and I had to figure out how I was going to convince them to take on another agenda that wasn't really seen as, this is not what real soldiers and warfighters do. But I had to convince them that, in fact, if you don't do this, you're not going to be training the way you want to, or you're going to be stopped in your tracks. And you're better off if you do it. And, that worked. It took a lot of time, a lot of patience. Sometimes I felt I was banging my head against a brick wall. And I had to come back to some issues, another day. You can't always get it all done at the pace you want to. But if you persist, I think you can, in the long run, look back and see that you've accomplished a lot.
Okay, so may I assume that you are proud of your younger self? Or would you have advised her to do something differently?
No, I feel very fortunate about the choices I've had and the opportunities I've had. Everyone has their own issues along the way. If you haven't failed at something, you haven't lived and you haven't learned. So it's not that, everything is perfect. But I do think, I had a chance to really lead in a unique way, in a unique juncture in history, and to help create this whole field now of climate and security, which I think has enduring value.
Hey, Sherri, I'm very happy and honored that you share your experience in this field, a field you've created yourself, as just mentioned. Are you optimistic with respect to the climate today?
Well, the climate crisis and the trajectory we're on wouldn't ordinarily give you one cause for optimism. But that, we have managed as a species to solve a lot of other, life-threatening challenges, in the past. And so I am a glass, half full person. I am, someone who came from, whose parents had traumatic experiences as a child that shaped my own upbringing. But I do feel that, we can, with the right set of innovation, application, technological ingenuity. I mean, there are a lot of great technologies out there that can help us more rapidly advance the green, clean climate energy transition. We just have to be willing to put them into practice, to lift ourselves out of some of the inertia. Ironically, we're still funding Putin's war on Ukraine every time, we're buying Russian oil and gas. So whoever's buying that is still funding that war. Now, that's not to say it's easy to make that shift. It's hard. And I know that, European countries are now working on that, not as rapidly probably as they should, but that's part of realizing that we do have the power to decarbonize. And that's the key to unlocking our climate future.
So there's a lot of technology out there to make that change. You do need the people and the willingness of the people to make it happen. Anything else, or is that what we need to make it happen?
Well, I do think that the climate activism that's emerged in the last several years has gone a long way. Again, none of it is enough. Nothing's enough on its own. The technology in it itself, if it isn't applied, it falls into a valley of death. If protesters in the streets don't themselves, immediately change the system. But all of these things can actually add up. And a crisis, as we say, is a terrible thing to waste. So we are in the middle today, of the most devastating, deadly war since World War II that has the potential to threaten, the stability and the democracy of so many countries. We should use this as an opportunity not only to fight back against the authoritarianism and aggression of Putin's Russia, but also to really rapidly advance the clean energy transition for the safety and stability of our planet and ourselves.
So in that respect, even the war in the Ukraine, in that respect, no, I would not call it a blessing in disguise.
No, it's not a blessing.
It's not a blessing. No, I realize that, but the outcome could have positive effects for the world in general, because it might accelerate that shift you're talking about.
It could, it could go either way, though. Frankly, if we just substitute Russian oil and gas and rebuild in, gas infrastructure from other places without thinking about how we need to transition, we could make some poor decisions. Hopefully, that won't happen, that we realize that that's just a near-term transition goal into a more renewable future.
Okay. Sherri, again, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights. You give us an overview why climate change is so important in this world to take serious. And for a lot of reasons, people might not realize when thinking about climate change. So I'm glad and happy and honored that you've enlightened us with that, let's say, additional perspective on what climate change is bringing us and what we should do about it and why. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Fritz. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.